I thought I understood silence, until the day my father finally broke his. One ordinary afternoon. One unexpected conversation. One single moment that flipped the entire meaning of my childhood on its head, and made me see my past and myself, like I'd been staring at the wrong picture frame all along. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin telling this complicated story of my life, I ask you to support our channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us. And now, enjoy listening. I've replayed that day more times than I can count. And every time it starts the same way, with the sound of a screen door groaning open, and the smell of dry earth and warm grass lifting into the air like the yard itself was exhaling. It wasn't a special day. No birthdays. No holidays. No big news. Just one of those afternoons that sits quietly in your memory. Until years later you realize it was never quiet at all. It was holding its breath. My name is Talia. I was 21 then, standing in that awkward middle space between who I used to be and who I was trying to become. The I'm grown but not really phase. The I finished school but my life didn't start phase. The phase where you wake up and feel like you're late for something but you don't know what. I'd moved back home temporarily. At least that's what I told everyone. I told my friends it was practical. I told my aunties it was, for a short while. I told myself I just needed a reset. Truth was, I needed the walls I grew up with, even if they still knew too much about me. Even if the corners of that house remembered my crying better than I did. My dad, Elias, had always been a man of routines. Coffee at 6 o'clock. Newspaper at 6:30. Silence until at least 8 o'clock. He wasn't cold. Not really. He just believed words should be used carefully, like tools you keep sharp and only pull out when necessary. Growing up, I learned to read him through gestures instead of sentences. The way he rolled up his sleeves when he was stressed. How he rubbed the bridge of his nose when he was holding something back. How he cleared his throat when he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the door into it. My mother used to say, "Your dad speaks in actions." I used to roll my eyes at that. Now I know she was translating a whole language for me. That afternoon, he was in the backyard at the old wooden table. The one with a leg that wobbled unless you slid a flat stone under it. The one that had survived years of family dinners and homework help and arguments that never fully happened, because in our house, conflict didn't shout, just waited. The sun filtered through the oak tree overhead, spilling slow-moving shadows across his hands. Those hands had always fascinated me. Strong, rough, steady. Hands that fixed broken things without needing applause. Hands that taught me how to ride a bike and patched my scraped knees and held my mother's hand in the hospital when he thought no one was watching. Those hands told stories he never did. I almost walked right past him. I had my phone in my hand, half listening to a voicemail from my friend, half thinking about what I would do next with my life. I was physically present, but mentally I was somewhere else. Somewhere loud, somewhere anxious. College was done. But direction wasn't. I felt like a house with all the lights on and nobody home. Busy, bright, and empty all at once. "Talia," he said. Just my name. No urgency. No command. But it stopped me like someone touched my shoulder. I turned, and for a moment we just looked at each other. It hit me how much older he seemed than I remembered. Or maybe, how much more I was finally seeing. The lines around his eyes weren't just from age. They were from watching. Waiting. Carrying things quietly. Things no one thought to ask about because he made it look easy. "Sit for a minute," he added, nodding to the chair across from him. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to sit, because I did. But because something in his voice felt different. Softer. Almost uncertain. That was new. And in our house, new things were suspicious. The chair creaked under me, and the air felt thick. Like the moment right before rain, when the sky hasn't decided if it wants to be calm or violent. Somewhere down the street, a lawn mower hummed. Normal life continued, while something unnamed gathered between us. He folded his hands, unfolded them, cleared his throat, looked past me, then back again. I don't talk much, he said, like he was reading a fact off a label we'd both seen for decades. I gave him a small smile. I know. He nodded once. Then quieter. Doesn't mean I don't think. That caught me off guard. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how fast my heart was beating. It's funny how your body knows something is coming before your mind catches up. I've been thinking about you, he continued. About how you're doing. A normal father thing to say, right? But when my dad said it, it felt like a confession. I wanted to answer quickly. To say I was fine. Keep it light. To make a joke. To slip out of the moment before it got too close. But something told me not to rush this. So I just said, okay. He seemed relieved by that, like I'd given him permission to keep going. When you were little, he said, I thought my job was to protect you from everything. Scraped knees. Bad dreams. The world. He paused. Turns out, you can't do that forever. My throat tightened. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of cut grass and something bittersweet I couldn't place. Like a memory trying to return. I wasn't always good at showing things, he said. Feelings. Pride. Worry. I let out a small laugh. Not cruel, not mocking. Just honest. That's one way to put it. He actually smiled then. Just barely. Your mom understood me, he said. She translated. Hearing her name still did something to my chest. My mother had been gone for years, but grief doesn't leave. Grief just changes clothes and shows up in different rooms. After she died, silence didn't just live in the house. Silence became the house. Then my father looked at me, really looked at me, and said something I wasn't ready for. I see you now. And blinked. Not just my kid, he continued. But you. A woman trying to figure things out. That sentence did something strange. It made me feel exposed. And respected at the same time. No one had ever said it like that. Not with that kind of weight behind it. Not with that kind of gentleness. I know I don't say this enough, he went on. But I'm proud of you. I almost didn't breathe. Not for what you've done, he added. For who you are. The words landed slowly like snow. I didn't cry right away. I didn't laugh. I didn't even know what face to make. I just sat there letting them settle into places I didn't know were empty. Then he surprised me again. I've made mistakes, he said. Times I should have spoken. Times I should have listened better. I shook my head, because the truth was I had blamed myself for the gaps between us more than I blamed him. You did the best you could, I said. He held my gaze. Nodded once. I hope that's true. We sat in silence after that. But it wasn't the same silence I grew up with. It was fuller, honest. The kind that doesn't need to be filled because it isn't empty. It's just calm. That was the day my dad spoke to me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Not like the movies. Just enough to change something inside me. Just enough to remind me that the moments we remember most aren't always the ones with fireworks. Sometimes they're the moments where someone finally says what's been waiting all along. The days after that conversation didn't announce themselves as different, but they felt different in the way the air feels after a storm has passed. Everything looked the same. Yet something invisible had shifted. I woke up the next morning with a strange sensation that a door inside me had been cracked open. Not wide, but enough to let light in. Dad went back to his routines. Coffee at 6 o'clock. Newspaper at 6:30. Silence until 8 o'clock. But now when I passed him in the hallway or poured cereal in the kitchen, there was something new in his eyes. Awareness. Permission. Like we had made an unspoken agreement. We could try again. Even if neither of us knew how to do it perfectly. And because I didn't know what to do with that kind of change, I did what I always do when my emotions get too loud. I stayed busy on purpose. I told myself it was productivity. But it was avoidance wearing makeup. I reorganized my childhood room. Opened boxes I hadn't touched in years. Old notebooks. Faded photos. A concert ticket from a night I barely remembered. Like my younger self had lived a whole life without leaving instructions. Every item felt like proof of how fast time had moved. and how little I paused to notice. One afternoon, I found a drawing I'd made when I was about 8. Clean. Uneven lines. A house with smoke curling from the chimney. 3 stick figures in front. One was labeled Mom. One was labeled Dad. The smallest one, smiling too big, was me. On the back, in shaky letters, I'd written, "My family is quiet but safe." I sat on the floor holding that paper longer than I expected. Quiet but safe. Even then, I understood something about us. Later that evening, Dad asked if I wanted to ride with him to the hardware store. The invitation itself felt like a breakthrough. Growing up, errands were solitary missions for him, not social events. "Sure," I said, trying not to sound surprised. His truck smelled like old leather and motor oil, the scent of a life that had been built with hands, not hashtags. The radio was tuned to classic rock, low enough that it felt like background memory rather than music. We drove with the windows down, the sun slanting across the dashboard. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. But the silence felt companionable now, like walking beside someone without needing to hold hands to prove you're together. "I used to take you with me places like this," he said eventually. "When you were little." "I remember," I said. "You let me hold the list." He smiled. "You took it very seriously." "I still do," I replied. And he laughed softly. That sound was rare enough that it made me laugh too, like my body was copying his joy because it didn't know what else to do with it. At the store, he moved through aisles like he belonged there. Tools, fruits, paint samples, order. This was his language, and he spoke it fluently. On the way back, he surprised me again. "Your mom used to worry about you," he said. I stared out the window. "About what?" "About how hard you are on yourself." My throat tightened. "She told you that?" "All the time," he said. I swallowed. "What did you say?" He paused. "That you were strong." Then softer. "That you'd find your way. Even if it took some wandering." That night, I lay awake thinking about wandering. About how lost I'd felt lately. About how much I punished myself for not having a perfect plan at 21. Like life was a test and I was failing it. Maybe wandering wasn't failure. Maybe wandering was part of the map. The next morning, Dad was already up when I came into the kitchen. He was washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, humming something under his breath. He looked at me. "Coffee?" he asked. "Yes, please." He poured it the way he always had. Black, no sugar. He remembered that even though I didn't drink it that way anymore. I didn't correct him. Some things don't need fixing. "Do you have plans today?" he asked. "Not really," I admitted. "Why?" He hesitated. Then, "I was thinking of going through some boxes in the garage. Old stuff. Could use an extra set of hands." The garage had always been an archive. Not organized, preserved. Dad believed in keeping things that might be useful someday. Tools, manuals, memories. We spent the morning opening dusty boxes, particles floating in the light like tiny ghosts of the past, except these weren't scary. They were familiar. He handed me things to sort through. I found my first soccer cleat, a broken toy car, a stack of birthday cards from years ago. Then I opened a box and froze. Letters, all addressed to my mother. His handwriting, careful, measured. Dad noticed immediately. "Those are private," he said gently. "But not secret." I stared at them like they were evidence of a version of him I never got to meet. "I didn't know you wrote," I whispered. He shrugged. It was easier than talking. I didn't read them. I just held them, feeling the weight of words he had chosen carefully. Words meant for someone who knew how to listen. We worked in silence after that, but it wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful. Later we sat on overturned crates eating sandwiches, the kind of simple lunch that tastes better because it's shared. And then he said something that hit even harder than, "I'm proud of you. I want you to know something." I looked at him. "You don't owe me a plan," he said. "Or explanations. You're allowed to take your time." My eyes burned. "Thank you," I managed. "I mean it," he added. "Life isn't a race. It's more like maintenance." He gestured around the garage. You take care of things as they come up. I laughed, wiping my face like it was just dust. That's very you. He smiled. I know. That evening I went for a walk alone, letting the neighborhood unfold around me. Houses that looked similar, but held completely different stories. And I realized something that should have been obvious but wasn't. My story didn't have to look like anyone else's to be valid. When I came back, Dad was on the porch watching the sky turn orange and pink. Sit, he asked. Sat. We didn't talk much, but when the stars came out, I felt something settle inside me. A steadiness. A sense that I wasn't walking alone anymore. By the third week of being home, I stopped counting the days. They began to blend together in a way that felt comforting instead of stagnant. Mornings came softly. Evenings lingered. And somewhere in between, I started recognizing myself again. Not as a version trying to impress or escape, but as someone learning how to stand still without fear. Dad and I fell into a rhythm I hadn't known we were missing. No dramatic heart-to-hearts every night. Just small exchanges that added up like coins in a jar. He'd comment on the weather and somehow it meant more than that. I'd ask his opinion on things I used to keep to myself. Job postings, interviews, whether it was normal to feel unsure at 21. He never rushed to answer. He thought first. And I loved that more than quick reassurance. One morning, I found him in the living room holding an old photo album. The thick kind with sticky black pages and plastic sheets that clung slightly when peeled back. He looked up when he heard me. Your idea, he said, tapping the album. Sorting. Smiled. How's it going? He gestured for me to sit. I did, curling my legs beneath me on the couch like I used to as a teenager. The album rested between us, open to a photo of my mom standing in the kitchen, laughing at something off camera. Probably him. She hated having her picture taken, he said. She never looks like it, I replied. That's because she forgot the camera was there once she started laughing, he said. He turned the page slowly. Birthday cakes, school plays, beach trips where we're all squinting into the sun. Each photo felt like a doorway to a memory I hadn't visited in years. I used to think memories were fragile, he said. Like they fade if you touch them too much. And now, yes, now I think they get stronger when you share them. That felt important. I let it settle like a seed. Later that day, I told him I had an interview coming up. Small one. Entry level. Not glamorous. But it mattered to me because it was movement. That's good, he said simply. Then, like he was casually offering salt at dinner, he added, Want to practice? Blinked. With you. He nodded. Why not? So we sat at the table and he asked questions he'd probably been asked himself years ago. Back when he was young enough to be afraid of the future. Why do you want this job? What do you bring to the table? What do you do under pressure? Then he asked, Where do you see yourself? That question stopped me. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. I don't know, I admitted. I feel like I'm supposed to. He leaned back in his chair like he was looking at a bigger picture. Knowing where you are, he said, is more important than knowing where you're going. I wrote that down later. I didn't tell him I wrote it down. But I did. That evening I met an old friend for coffee. She asked how things were at home. And I surprised myself by saying, Good. Really good. Not because everything was perfect, because it wasn't. But because I felt understood in a way I hadn't before. When I returned, Dad was in the driveway working on the truck, hood up, hands dark with grease. He looked up. How was it? Nice, I said, then hesitated. And said something that felt like truth breaking through. I realized something. He wiped his hands on a rag. What's that? I don't need to rush away from here. He nodded like he'd been waiting for me to say it. Home's allowed to be a place you come back to, he said. The next few days brought rain, the kind that settles in and makes the world feel smaller. We stayed inside more. He read. I worked on applications. Sometimes we shared a comment about the storm or the quiet. One afternoon the power went out. We laughed at the timing, then gathered candles from the cupboard. The house glowed softly, shadows stretching and shrinking with each flicker. Felt like stepping back in time. And maybe because the dark makes you honest, I asked a question that surprised both of us. Tell me something. All right, he said. What were you afraid of when you were my age? He didn't answer right away. He stared into the candle flame like it was holding the memory for him. Being ordinary, he said finally. Then he exhaled. Turns out, ordinary is underrated. I nodded slowly. I think I'm afraid of choosing wrong, I said. He met my eyes. Most choices aren't permanent, he said. And the ones that are, you grow around them. The power came back later, but the moment stayed. A few days after that, I was in the garage alone, looking for a notebook. I opened a drawer I hadn't opened before. Inside was a folded piece of paper. My heart started beating too fast. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was a letter addressed to me. I sat on the step and unfolded it carefully, like it might break if I moved too fast. Talia, if you're reading this, it means I didn't say everything out loud. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't know how. I hope you always know my quiet was never absence. It was learning. I loved you in the only ways I understood at the time. I tried more than you saw. If I made you feel alone, I'm sorry. If I made you feel unseen, I'm sorry. You were always my greatest responsibility. And my greatest joy. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You never did. Love, Dad. My eyes blurred. I didn't even realize I was crying until a tear landed on the paper. Then I heard footsteps. Dad stepped into the garage. He saw the letter in my hand and didn't look surprised. You found that, he said quietly. I wasn't snooping, I said quickly, embarrassed like a child caught doing something wrong. I know, he replied. It's yours. I looked at him. Why didn't you give it to me? He smiled softly, and in that smile I saw the younger version of him, the man my mother used to look at like he hung the moon. I wanted you to find it when you were ready, he said. That's when I stood up and hugged him. Not a quick pat. Not an awkward half hug. A real hug. And it wasn't weird. It wasn't forced. It was steady. It was safe. That night, lying in bed, I realized something important. That day he spoke to me hadn't just changed how I saw him. Changed how I saw myself. I wasn't waiting to be told I mattered anymore. I knew it. And in that knowing I felt ready. Not for everything. Not for the whole future. Just for the next step. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unveiling. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. But it became more bearable. More truthful. I started noticing the small things. The way Dad hummed under his breath while cooking, like the house needed a soundtrack. How he left little notes around the kitchen without making a big deal out of it. Don't forget your documents. Call about the interview. Eat something real today, not just snacks. His love still wasn't loud. But now I could hear it. One Saturday morning I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Maybe toast too, that warm scent that makes you feel like the world isn't as harsh as you thought. Dad was at the stove, moving with his usual deliberate rhythm. He looked up and smiled. An actual smile like he'd been practicing. Morning, he said. Thought I'd make breakfast before you drag yourself out of bed. I laughed, sliding onto a chair at the counter. Thanks. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he replied simply. That was his way of saying more than the words carried. Over breakfast, the conversation was casual at first. Neighbors, weather, job applications, a minor complaint about the dishwasher. Then it shifted. He looked at me carefully, the way he did when he wanted to say something important but needed to find the right door into it. I've been thinking, he began, about everything. About how I raised you. I braced myself for criticism. Vice, regret. Instead he said, I hope you know every time I kept quiet or walked away. It wasn't because I didn't care. He paused like the truth was heavy in his mouth. I just didn't always know the right way to be there. But I always wanted to. The sincerity hit me like a wave. Not the casual I love you people say out of habit. This was raw. Deliberate. A man admitting he didn't always know how to be a father, but he never stopped being one. "I know," I said softly. "And I know now you've always been there. Even when it didn't feel like it." He let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. After breakfast we went outside. The sun was bright but gentle. I leaned on the porch railing watching leaves flutter, feeling a calm I wasn't used to. Dad stepped beside me. We stood there quietly. Then he said, almost to himself, "You're ready." "For what?" I asked. "For life," he said. And it wasn't a push. It wasn't a command. It was recognition. Passing of trust. In the days that followed, I began making plans with a new kind of confidence. I applied for more jobs, reached out to friends I'd neglected, even considered volunteering somewhere, just to be around people again, to feel useful, to feel alive. Each step felt lighter because my foundation wasn't shaky. It was steady, built on years of silent devotion, and finally spoken truth. One evening, after a long day of applications and resume edits, I found Dad in the backyard watching the sun dip low, painting the sky in orange and violet. I sat beside him. We let the silence stretch comfortably. Then I said, "You know, I used to think independence meant doing everything alone." He glanced at me. "And now I see it's not weakness to lean," I said. "It's part of growing, part of understanding people, and part of understanding myself." He nodded. "I'm proud of you," he said again, "not just for what you do, but for how you're learning to be." That night I went to bed with a peace I hadn't known before. The house didn't feel like a place to escape anymore. It felt like a home I could carry with me, because it had taught me the truth about connection, respect, and love. Before bed, I wrote in my journal, something I'd started doing while I was home, trying to capture pieces of what I was learning. I wrote about the letters, the photo album, power outage, the way my father's love had always been there, just spoken in a different dialect. And I realized my story, while still unfolding, had already given me something priceless: clarity. The next morning, I woke with the intention to take the next step. Not to sprint, not to force certainty, just to keep moving. As I walked past Dad in the kitchen, I felt a surge of gratitude for the man who taught me how to listen, how to speak, and how to be seen. The most remarkable thing about our relationship now was its simplicity. No grand gestures, no dramatic confessions, just presence, trust, respect. And in that simplicity, I discovered a depth I never expected. Because the day my father finally spoke to me, one ordinary afternoon that became extraordinary, didn't just stay in my memory. It became a turning point. A reminder that growth doesn't always come from sudden change. Sometimes it comes from quiet moments, patiently waiting for us to finally notice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment your thoughts, right here on Secret Woman Stories.